I'm now summarizing my notes from the Human Rights Tribunal of B.J. Baljiwan Sandhu versus Peel Police. That happened on Monday. And just want to, the notes here, there's an opening statement by Sandhu's lawyer who starts out by saying that Staff Sergeant Sandhu was with Peel Police for 24 years, and that within the region of Peel, the vast majority of those racialized citizens are of South Asian heritage. He was repeatedly put into the role because of his race. That is the kind of assignments that he was given because of his South Asian background. And that said, he received positive and glowing evaluations. By 2013, again, Peel was reflective of the diverse communities. In fact, region of Peel is one of the most diverse areas in Canada. My notes say he applied for promotion in 2013, and he would have been the first South Asian to reach inspector or higher. I write that he had an exemplary and highly decorated employment record. His supervisor, though, did not recommend him for inspector. He filed a grievance in May 2015 for discrimination. He felt that there were 3 areas of reprisals. First of all, after his filing a grievance, he got a negative performance appraisal in August 2015, and he got a denial of transfer out of the airport division. And then the Peel regional police lawyer gave his opening statements, and he said that staff sergeant is sort of third from the bottom, and senior officers are inspector or higher. The Peel police lawyer says this is not an issue of eligibility, but that the case revolves around, quote, narrative assessment. There's mention of a tape recording of the meeting by Sandhu, largely a glowing assessment, and there was an hour-long consultation with Sandhu and Thorne that was recorded on audio. And then we get into the B.J. Sandhu called up to testify, and he says that he's of South Asian descent, and he's Punjabi and Sikh, and that he was and staff sergeant in the airport division assigned there, and that 35 million people go through it annually. He says Peel region is one of the country's most diverse areas, with 59% racialized citizens. The province of Ontario is 25%. The country is 19%, and he was quoting 2011 statistics. He mentions 2013 Peel Police Equal Opportunity Report. 43% of Peel are South Asian. Sandhu also says that the ethnic visible population has exploded, and exploded were his exact words, and that they pose significant challenges. And he says number one problem is a language barrier. Another is the cultural norms and mores, and also anything that to do with domestic, and he had to deal with anything that to do with domestic conflicts to communal conflicts. And he said he was assigned to these because otherwise they might not be understood how to investigate and come up with good workable solutions. He gave an example of communal conflict. He was staff sergeant in diversity relations, and he was called in by Deputy Chief Teslaff over a weekend. during, I think, a Republic celebration of India. And a group of, I can't make it out, but protesters dropped flags on the road, forcing people to drive over the flags or to walk on them. And it was their national flag being driven over and trampled on. So diversity relations will be present, and TEFLAF assigned him to deal with and resolve the issues. An example of domestic is in the early 90s. There's a letter from Peel Police about an abusive relationship, and he went to the residence, investigated the information, and the woman was hesitant to speak. He took her to a place of safety. This is Sandhu reporting this, and he took her statement in Hindu, and charges were laid. He also says that children who grow up in Canada don't often have the same values as their Indian parents, or in India, and he gives an example of a girl finds her own boyfriend instead of those chosen by the parents, and the girl leaves with the boyfriend. And if that news hits the community's family back home, the family will lose face. And he said it was his understanding of the culture that if the situation wasn't handled properly, the incident could plunge into what he called honor killings. So I've got a new category. It says Peel Police Organization and Structure. So at this point, Sandhu's lawyer had Sandhu relate what the Peel Police organizational structure is. And this was as of May 5th, 2013. And Peel Police has three major command areas. There's a Field Operations Command. It oversees the uniformed division. There are 8 duty inspector offices. Uniformed officers respond to radio calls. And a more complex call, they use CIB, which is the Criminal Investigation Bureau. Then there are public divisions, but he points out that all of the divisions are public divisions. They have 8 duty inspectors supervising the work of anything that goes out on the road. They ensure that uniformed officers, and then I wrote down missed it, because sometimes Sandhu or the lawyer says something so quickly that I couldn't take it down. So it was ensure uniformed officers, and then couldn't get it all. And the duty inspectors are monitoring the calls, and the uniforms, means uniform officers and the sergeants, and to make sure that all are following procedures. Inspectors do the administrative duties. Duty inspectors, they deal with sergeant and uniforms, and he says whatever on the road is supervised by duty inspectors. Then another division is corporate services, and he says that that's human resources and IT, which is information and technology risk management. And that the skills for supervision of risk management will be different than the skills required for field operations. They then make reference to the Peel Police Strategic Plan 2011 and the rank structure of Peel Police in 2013. And I guess we'll start at the bottom. So you start out as a recruit, when you're hired. You then go, I guess you take OPC, which is, I think, Ontario Police College. And once you've completed that, you're now 4th class constable. Then in a year or so, with, I think, a mentor officer, and you can then become constable 3rd class. And another year, if everything's okay, you can become constable 2nd class. And finally, Constable First Class. And this is a reclassification based on learning and the HR, Human Resources supervisors, saying that everything's okay. After that, you get into Sergeant, Detective, and detectives investigate, and the sergeants, they supervise the uniformed officers. They monitor calls, and those officers lower in rank than they are, which means most of the constables. All of the constables, I guess. From a sergeant detective, you then get staff sergeant detective, staff sergeant and detective sergeant. And they supervise everyone under them. So they'll supervise the sergeant detectives and the 5 classes of constables. After that, you get into the senior officers, and the first senior officer is the inspector. They're in charge of a bureau, and it could be CIB, which was Criminal Investigation Bureau, or uniformed group. So that's your first class of senior officers. Then you have, from inspector, you then have superintendent. From superintendent, you get, I think it's staff superintendent. Then you get deputy chief, and of course, finally after that, the chief of police. And it says constable to sergeant detective. That is first class constable to sergeant detective is promotional competition. So the 5 classes of constables are reclassification based on performance. But if you want to be something other than a constable and you start getting into sergeant detective, that becomes a competition. It's a true promotion. It says first, in order to go into, say, sergeant or detective sergeant, you first have to do some acting sergeant or detective, active detective kind of work. And if that's favorable, then it's... and Sandhu also says that it's desirable to get some of this acting experience. And if that's favorable, then, you know, your supervisor is more like, will recommend you for your promotion. But staff sergeant and sergeant are both competitions. Then inspector and above are the senior officers. And Sandhu points out they're under a different bargaining agreement. They're managerial administration. So, let's see. You've got your levels of constables, which is reclassification. You get your sergeant detective, which is the first promotion competition, then competition staff sergeant, and then you get, there's a break there into a new contract bargaining agreement, and called senior officers, inspector, superintendent, staff superintendent, deputy chief, and chief. Okay, that's done. I'm now on page 3. And this deals with 1989 to, I think, 2000. He was Sandhu was an officer at Peel Regional Police. And he said that at the time that he was hired, or during that time, there were 2 Punjabi Sikh South Asian officers in Peel Regional Police, and Sandhu was the first in the Brampton area. That's going back a long way. Then there's reference to the Equal Opportunity Plan 2013, and it says that my cat is right here. You see him? There he is. Hi, sweetie. Yeah, you're going to be good. You going to be good? You're not going to block the camera, are you? All right. Anyway, the Equal Opportunity Plan 2013. Trying that again. Then there's reference to a Equal Opportunity Plan 2013, and that plan summarizes Peel Police workforce. There's a total of about 2,000 officers, and of those 2,000, 317 are racialized. And Sandhu thought that 80, perhaps 85 of the 2,000 officers were Punjabi and Sikh. And of the senior officers, there are 55 senior officers. There were 5 that were racialized and none were South Asian. And he points out that in Detective Staff Sergeant, there's something like, were 76 Detective Staff Sergeants in 2013. 7 were racialized, and 4 were South Asian, of which Sandhu was one. And it also says Sandhu, constable, and after a short while, he was known and appreciated because he spoke Punjabi and because of his culture. So he was involved in all kinds of situations that drew on his South Asian heritage in, criminal investigations and stuff like that. Then he was part of the community policing unit. He started that in 1990. And again, Sandhu was selected to start that unit. It was community-based policing, and in partnership with informal groups like ratepayers associations, etc. And he said very early on, it then morphed to neighborhood policing unit. Schools were also included. He was called to assist the CIB, that's the Criminal Investigation Unit, because he understood the language and the culture. Criminality in Southeast Asian, communities were, this was interesting. Sandhu at one point said it was quite difficult because he said that the Southeast Asian criminality, he said, spin complex webs, and requires significant understanding. And he said he was called in because of his race, culture, and contacts, and that he could figure out what was going on and find solutions. He was then transferred to the Intelligence Bureau. At that's the year 2000. He was promoted to Intelligence Bureau. Wait a second, we can't say promoted. Okay, be very careful. He was transferred to the Intelligence Bureau, and he referred to it as a South Asian portfolio. In 2006, he was transferred to the Airport Division, gathering intelligence in the early 2000s, and he became aware of some pretty large groups of individuals involved in drugs and in very large quantities. And he said it took him a year to draft an organizational chart of the South Asian Punjabi drug group. Then Sandhu relates problems regarding Sikh temples, that there were some very violent struggles to control the temples. He said police did not have a clue what was going on in the temples. He was saying at one point that in one of these situations, uniformed officers arrived on the scene and didn't have a clue who was fighting with who or for what reason. In 2010, Incident Diversity Relations was asked to attend a meeting at a Sikh temple. 40 uniformed officers arrived, or he used the word amassed. Duty sergeant said not to go in until there was a call and a fight happened, and that's when police went in. It strained uniformed resources, and he called it reactive policing. Sandhu called it reactive policing. He said there's a better way that you engage the leadership of the opposing factions a day before the meeting. And he said 4 to 5 officers should have been sufficient instead of 40 on the day that it was happening. He said between 1992 and 2004, he was involved in 8 South Asian homicide assists. And when word that there was a huge temple gathering at night that might erupt, he was assigned to create an organizational plan to deal with it. In April 2006, he held the rank of sergeant at the airport division, supervising uniformed officers till January 2009. July to December 2008, at the airport division, Metcalf, that's chief at the time, Chief Metcalf, transferred him to the airport division for intelligence work. He called it strategic intelligence, and to take the pulse, or to read the pulse of the community, and also to assist. And he was just moved to the airport division. He didn't apply. There is no South Asian component to the airport division. I don't know what that means. No South Asian component to the airport division. And as an aside, the airport division is very interesting to me because of the public consultations on carding in Peel Police. And Peel Police came up with a report that was given to the Peel Police Services Board in September 2015, a couple of months back. And there were some statistics, race statistics, that I'd been following. And also I filed my own Freedom of Information at the same time. And the division that was the most interesting, because it was responsible for a greater percentage of the carding and street checks than any other one, was the airport division. And lucky, that was the cat. Okay. Yeah, the statistics showed that the majority of these street checks were done at airport division, something like 36%, and some of the other divisions was, I think the lowest may have been around 18, certainly was under 20%. So it was the busiest, and there were also some interesting anomalies to the airport division, and something that was referred to as airport scoopers. Now, I never had a chance to ask Sandhu either on Monday or Friday, because I figured, he needs to concentrate on the hearing, not on being distracted by my questions. But the airport division is certainly of considerable interest to me. So Metcalf transfers him, Sandhu, to the airport division, and Sandhu himself did not make the request. And he says, no South Asian component to airport division, and I'm not entirely sure, I can't remember what that actually meant. By 2008, Sandhu was promoted to rank of staff sergeant, and then transferred to diversity relations as detective sergeant. January 2009 to June 2012, at diversity, from time to time, he was acting inspector. If you remember the whole idea that if you want to be promoted to the next level, there's something called acting. You get some experience at that level. So he got some experience as acting inspector at the diversity relations unit. January 2009, in the second or third week, he met with Chief Metcalf. Oh, and Metcalf had asked Sandhu if there were any kind of issues that he saw, and Sandhu told Metcalf that there was a need to engage the ethnic community in a meaningful manner. And I'll repeat that. He'd been called in for an interview early, once he was transferred to diversity relations by Metcalf, who asked, you're new here, but do you see any issues? And Sandhu said, yeah, you're really going to need to engage the ethnic community in a meaningful manner. And my own research and investigations into Peel Region, specifically through the Peel Youth Violence Prevention Network, and that's like freedom of information, all kinds of things, show that a lot of the engagement is superficial, tokenism, and very, very, very little is meaningful manner. The closest I've seen meaningful are the Peel carding street check consultations, but even they're not meaningful because Peel Police hasn't given the members of the public there the true street check statistics. And I won't go into that right now. So meaningful, the only way you can have a meaningful engagement of citizens is if they are truly informed about what's going on. And whether it's a City of Mississauga or Peel Police, the real information that they need is withheld. So they are pretty much consulting in a vacuum. So anyway, Sandhu suggests that Metcalf go to some of these informal meetings of various ethnic groups. And Metcalf said to him, and I've written this down, keep them away from me. And Metcalf's solution, Sandhu said, well, there has to be some kind of credibility here. We need the weight of the chief in these community meetings. And Sandhu said that Metcalf asked him, are your business cards made up yet? And Sandhu said no. And Metcalf then tells him, add this to the bottom of your business card. Office of the Chief of Police. So I guess when Sandhu could flash a card, it would say Office of the Chief of Police. So theoretically, he was speaking on behalf of Metcalf to the ethnic community. And Sandhu's role is Diversity Relations Bureau. And he presumed it would be a 2 or 3 year assignment. This is diversity. He said if he were told it would be 5 years, he'd have had a concern about his career. And he was asked why. And this one really surprised me, he said, because diversity relations, and that's by the regular police officers and also management, feel that diversity relations, quote, that's not real policing. That said, Sandhu made it clear that he felt diversity relations was critical. And in fact, when you get the police, when you hear the police say it publicly, they'll tell you how critical and important diversity relations is. However, the private mask clearly views diversity relations as not real policing. But Sandhu says that the role of diversity relations media from January to June 2009, he had to report to, I think the name is Kreiderman, and who was then replaced by Chris McCord from January 2009 to October 2010. And then apparently to Inspector Craig Elliss. He, in that time, in his role, he conducted over 100 interviews with the ethnic media for TV and radio. And he got this position from a grant, and that he could speak Punjabi, Urdu, and Hindi. He was the contact person for newcomers, and he says that he felt, and he was told, and this is a quote, that race and ethnicity was the greatest factor there, I guess, to his role. Chief Management Group document, January 2011. The grant ended. and I remember this from a comment yesterday, that this particular position that he held was part of a grant, and I guess the grant started in 2009 and that it would end in 2011. And when the grant ended, Metcalf recommended a continuation of his role and diversity relations despite the loss of funding. And South Asian contacts were the most numerous by far. I suspect that year he was, in 2011, Sandhu was named one of the most influential South Asians. Was in a media article. And then he references 5 goals to the Peel Police strategic plan. And one of it was attracting visible minorities for recruitment, fostering succession planning. There was a succession plan that was started by Metcalf in 2000 when he was staff sergeant. So the goal is to attract racialized recruits. You foster a succession plan. You groom them for mentorship and special training. And then I write missed it, which means that he talked too fast. In June 2009, diversity merged with, and again I wrote down that I missed it, an acting inspector at the time of the 2010 Sikh flag incident. And it shouldn't make sense to you because it doesn't make any sense to me. And then there was a lunch break at 1:30. And now you get into the afternoon session. And it says, they're talking about, Sandhu's talking about the Diversity Relations Office. It reports to the chief or to others as needed. And that he's actually speaking for the chief and for Peel Regional Police. He talks again about the temple management being very offended as to how Peel Police handled the tension and injury in 2010. And Mayor Susan Fennell complained on behalf of the community. And just for some context, in 2010, Mayor Susan Fennell was on the Peel Police Services Board. And Sandhu says, I thought I was doing very important work helping the chief. And that he was working, that he felt that his work was being devalued, that it was not being seen as real policing. And real policing is seen as a uniform and the investigative unit by the management. And at one point, Sandhu asks, am I part of the succession planning? And then I've got it in quotes. He says, I wasn't being considered for any further development regarding succession planning. And then we get into December 2010. The second year came to an end in the diversity unit. He asked to leave to gain experience in other areas. The new guy was Elliss, I guess it would be a supervisor, said he was needed in the diversity unit. Oh yeah, because Elliss was new, he said he needed someone more of a veteran to stay in the diversity unit. So so Sandhu agreed to stay to June 2011. December 2011, he applied to get out of diversity. So you can tell that June came and went, and now it's December. And the first application out to the airport division, it was an unposted position, and you can apply without there being a vacancy, but that means you can be posted anywhere. And generally, they open up after the posted positions are filled. Elliss wasn't happy with the application, and he says, well, who's going to run the diversity relations unit? Then he called Sandhu back to his office. I guess he'd thought about it for a while and said, yes, okay, but he was unsuccessful in the transfer. May and June 2012, he applied again. Application for unposted, but asked for the airport specifically. Elliss recommended it, and he was successful. And when he was asked why he requested the airport division, Sandhu says, I just wanted to get out of diversity relations. He felt it would be of no help to his career development. He said, it was not seen as real policing, so he said he'd be prepared to be transferred, and then in quote, even to the airport division. And I found that significant, even to the airport division. And there was some reference, why do you want to be transferred to the airport division with your father being sick? Sandhu's lawyer asked, what do you mean by that? And it was just that, it's seen as a bit more difficult, and that there are 12-hour shifts. Then, at that time, Sandhu makes reference to seeing a cartoon caricature on Ellis's wall, and it's a cartoon of him and the four in the diversity unit, and it says underneath it, Ellis's tactical unit, or something like that. And he took a photograph of the cartoon, and he said he was really disappointed that this was gracing Ellis's wall. Oh, now I remember. The cartoon, the cartoon was drawn during a presentation that Sandhu had made on diversity relations, and he had talked to this class about how important it is that the ethnic community be treated fairly, and that when they come into a police division, that they be treated with respect and dignity. And during that talk, there was one of the officers in the room who drew that cartoon of the diversity unit, and wrote Ellis's tactical unit on it. And apparently, I guess Sandhu saw this guy, do the cartoon. During that time, he never received a performance appraisal at the Diversity Relations Bureau, and from January 2012 to February 2013, at no time did he receive any acting inspector duty at the airport division. If you remember, in order to be considered promoted to the next level, officers are allowed to do, or encouraged to do, acting duties, and it could be like an acting sergeant or acting staff sergeant, or if you want to become an inspector, have some hours acting inspector. So in over a year, he did not receive any acting inspector duties. Sandhu also relates some of the challenges of the airport division, where he was staff sergeant, and he says he has a smaller complement of officers, and yet there's 35 million people go through Pearson a year. He says at times it can become overcrowded with stranded passengers, and that can turn assaultive. Flight origins can come in with dead passengers. It also attracts, which I found interesting, a very high number of mental health issues, bomb threats, child abductions, contraband, drugs, weapons. And interestingly enough, he said some people go to the airport to commit suicide. And also, you can get international media. Oh yeah, when there's things that are really hitting the fan. He said the other issue is that you can get international media attention. Okay, so that's done. So we're now on the last page here. By now it's 2:55, and he details the awards and commendations that he was given. I didn't list them. He said in his mind there's no difference between his work and others. The only difference was language. And he said he was probably put where he was because he was valuable where he was because of his language and culture. He said he had become an expert in South Asian community and it helped all Peel Regional Police Bureau. So he could be called by anywhere from Peel Police to help out on an issue dealing with South Asians, either language or cultural. Then there was a break at around 3:42, and after the break, Sandhu's lawyer wants to introduce what were called historical incidents. And the Peel Police lawyer objected. And he said that, that stuff's going back so far that what's relevant to the 2013 promotion. Sandhu says, well, it points to a, quote, pervasive culture of prejudice against South Asians in the Peel Police culture. And I'll repeat that. A pervasive culture of prejudice against South Asians in Peel Police culture. And he said that the historical incidents will detail the culture of the police service. So it goes back to 1989. There was a presentation during basic training, and Constable, something like Bob Bamlett, was asked how the Communications Bureau works, and he said, well, it's currently manned by police officers, but will eventually be handled by women and Pakis. And Sandhu's response on hearing this, he's in the room, says, I sat there in class, composed, looking straight ahead. And 1989, this would be April, he walked into, I guess, a gym or something. There were about 100 officers sitting in the bleachers. And as he walked in, somebody yelled, hey, no one called a cab. And he said all of the officers laughed. And apparently the officer was Joss Leeser. Who I guess he's the one who yelled, hey, no one called the cab. And Sandhu's response was, he said he was horribly embarrassed. I did not know how to react. He said that that there were times constables in 21 Division, and they would speak to him in a mimicking East Asian accent. And when he brought this up to his superior, his response was, BJ, they like you. That's what they're doing. And when he was asked about others in other situations, he said there were just way too many to remember. So there's a lot of this taunting, derogatory Pakis and hey, calling a cab and stuff like that, and speaking in the East Asian accents as well. 1995, he was paired up with a Scotsman, and he'd go to bars and strip joints and deal with drug and liquor licensing. And they were referred to as Braveheart and Gandhi, the Braveheart and Gandhi team. And in 21 Division, apparently someone called Sergeant Paul Donnelly called him Sonny Sandhu Bombay Vice. So, then there's reference again to his duty in monitoring the turbulence at the temples. And at one point, Sandhu reports that they're potentially a bed of a whole lot of violent political activity. And the Peel police officer or superior's response, or officers just said, let them be killed and we'll pick up the pieces. He heard them being called teetotalers or teetoters because he drank tea and spoke with informal leaders. And a detective, Mike LeBrute and Dave Viazzi, these were detectives, and Lloyd Lancaster. He said all this happened post 9/11. He said he felt that his work with the South Asian community was devalued. He did complain about the behavior to Inspector Steve Dolan in 2003, and to his credit, Dolan took it to the next level operational commander meeting, and the behaviors continued, the taunting behaviors continued. Then in 2005, there was the Air France crash at Pearson, and after lots of work cleaning the scene, this was afterwards, he called Paul Donnelly and asked, whether everything was fine and enough to go. And Donnelly apparently started to laugh. And the next day he was still laughing. And I guess he asked what was so funny. And he said that he was being referred to as Ganji or Ganji. And pretty well by all in the room. I didn't get it. That one went just right over my head. And Sandhu explains that Gangadin, or Ganji, is from Rudyard Kipling. It's about a native water boy in a regiment, I think an Indian regiment perhaps. And it was Inspector Rob Orr who made that comment apparently. And after 2005 through to 2010, Donnelly was still calling him Gangadin or Ganji. And even in a 2010 email, it was Ganji from Donnelly, who's now retired. And Norman English also was also CC'd on this email. And English confronted Donnelly regarding use of Ganji, and it did stop. Again, I forget the details that Sandhu relates, but there was a call-in about a motor vehicle accident. He was asked whether there's any South Asians, and he'd said no, and the officer responded with good, because all South Asians lie. And there's a name mentioned here who's currently in charge of diversity, but I'm not sure about my notes enough to name that person. And he referred to a photo early in the mid-90s. Oh, okay. Somebody had sent Sandhu a photograph, and it was a photograph of him, Dave Demers, and Lee Weir or something. And it had written on the photograph, was sent by Demers, and written on the photograph was, "Please speak English." And this was inter-office mail that was sent in June 2013. 2009 incident, Detective Sergeant at the Diversity Relations at Derry Road met Inspector Norm English in the corridor. Oh, I remember this. Let's just go back a little bit. This is something that's been going on. In fact, San Greywell Toronto Star just recently had an article about how Peel Police still don't have many racialized officers, and that they're not progressing nearly as quickly as Toronto Police. They are more diverse. Even they aren't reflective, but Toronto Police are certainly getting more racialized officers into their service. And so apparently, this was a 2009 incident that Sandhu relates, when he was Detective Sergeant on the Diversity Relations, and he'd met Inspector Norm English in the corridor, and they've been talking about how Peel Police was not reflective yet, but that Toronto Police was advancing a lot better as far as the number of racialized officers in the service. And the inspector said, we have been trying, and that's true, they have been trying to recruit more racialized officers or from ethnic background. But he also made a comment, this had to do with the idea of getting promoted, and referred to Sandhu as he's the best of a bad bunch. And Sandhu said whatever he had done at that point, his entire career, all of his achievements and accomplishments, he said, was demolished with that one comment. And he said, I worked with all my loyalty to bolster the image of Peel Regional Police. He represented the chief with great pride. But the comment, he's the best of a bad bunch, that just did it. That's kind of like the fracture that at that point essentially broke him. And this is from what, if my notes are correct, is a 2009 comment. And that's where it was left on Monday. And it was a long session. It was a really, really long session and intense. And then it was left that Friday, November the 13th, would be a continuation of Sandhu's testifying, and then there would be cross-examination by the Peel Police lawyer. And I'll be going to those notes, and they'll be fresher in my mind. Turning camera off.